toes, because you're stepping closer. You're running rings around me most of the time. I'd be okay if I could leave out jealousy, but I'm only human, well, most of the time. And it's better for you, it's not so clever for me. You're running rings around me all of the time. And it's better for you, it's not so clever for me. You're running rings around me all of the time.
Yeah, so I thought it'd be interesting to have you on. My own background is more of a kind of classical liberal, kind of right economics or right liberal perspective. And, so I'm coming from what I believe to be a sort of econocentric or materialist sort of perspective, but not of a Marxist type or not of an old left type. And so this has meant in recent years I've gravitated toward what you might call old style socialism, hard hat leftism, various other terms you could use. And so I'm interested in somehow breaking bread or synthesizing a kind of a small man social democratic but market home and hearth social democratic sort of perspective. I think I probably repeated some words there. Anyway, I'm trying to carve out a somewhat American perspective, in the sense that it does not dispense with sort of adherence to sort of classical liberal or market ideals, but also takes on board a kind of empathetic pro common people leftism. And I see left and right broadly now both moving away from both moving away from some semblance of that.
Or it sounds like, anyway, correct me if I'm wrong, more libertarian early background, because I may have had some experience in the same circles going back over a decade, but also exactly where you see the problems on the right nowadays, since with the left it's somewhat more obvious, but
started off writing on
your thinking.
Yeah, so I did start off, from a libertarian place. There was a website called Strike the Root years ago that I wrote for, and so in the era of MySpace, I was creating MySpace pages for individualist anarchists, and I was interested in the dispute between the anarcho-communists of Chicago and the Boston anarchists, and then more of an individualist anarchist, and I found that very very interesting. But what they both had is essentially sort of enlightenment, liberal freedoms, and economic perspective at the heart of it. And so I've maintained that very general stance against the identitarian.
I was aware of Strike the Root back when I guess in the 2000s, because when I, of course, followed antiwar.com in those days, naturally rubbed off on Lew Rockwell, going to their 25th anniversary conference that they held in New York in 2007, at the height of, literally, the height of Ron Paul enthusiasms, was in many ways a disillusioning experience. But yeah, my memory of Strike the Root is that it was, it was, I guess, in content more left libertarian than Lew Rockwell would have been, but had a very nasty right coded edge to it, kind of.
Well, I recall that there was a picture of Henry David Thoreau, and I think the word "strike the root" came from one of Henry David Thoreau's writings. And so, I remember writing an article for them that sounds sort of proto woke, and I'm a little ashamed of it in a sense. It said something about the Republicans' white guy problem or something, and they still publish that. So it might have had some kind of edge to it, but it seemed to be coming from a sort of, basically.
The thing I can most clearly picture was something had to do with the 2000 election dispute. And bit of trivia: at 15, I was on the cover of the Washington Post in a shouting match outside the Supreme Court, the first of the two hearings. But that's certainly ancient history that shouldn't occupy us here. But no, I was definitely plugged into like Kevin Carson and the people in the Rockwell orbit who took an interest in that. In fact, it was 2005. I was actually on a panel with American Philosophical Association where I was talking about I guess calling back to the individualist anarchists and the formative years of the AFL in the 19th century, and it was Charles Johnson was the other panelist, and I was shocked that what I was in for was him going on a much more left, a much more left anarchist kind of tack, and identifying with the IWW, and of course he's basically the major figure of the hyper-wokeification of that scene, and I understand Kevin Carson has pretty much gone along with that.
I actually Kevin Carson, God bless his soul, is posting a lot of this political stuff on LinkedIn, and I got in a little bit of a tussle with him. Essentially, it boiled down to him thinking that the cable installer guy who was fired from his job some years back for attending a Proud Boys meeting got what he deserved, and he has no problem with him being people like that being driven out of the economy, losing their jobs. And I just felt that was, he said, like, he gets what he deserves, and so and I could see
without knowing the individual circumstances of that particular case, certainly the spirit or default assumption, I would agree with you.
Essentially, he was if I recall the case, he was a cable installer in the eastern Pennsylvania area, and it would, word got out that he had simply attended a meeting of the Proud Boys or something. So anyway, that was the catalyst for a disagreement between Kevin Carson and I, and he does seem to have gotten, I hate to use cliched phrases, but I'm going to avoid the cliched phrase and just say that Trump is very, very, very foremost on his mind, and it seems as if his politics is sort of primarily a reaction to Trump and his milieu. That's the
I wonder what's going to happen. I don't necessarily want to talk a whole lot about this past election, but I do seem to be vindicated that in feeling I voted in New York, I had to cast a write-in, which I did for Chase Oliver. Not that necessarily reflects anything about me, but I do seem to have been right that, however, ironically, Trump had to win for us to be able to move on from Trump, and I would have voted for Vance at the top of the ticket in a heartbeat. Kevin Carson, the person who first, I never met him, the person who first showed me his books, someone I don't know if you know anything about, I once in a blue moon hear something about him over the last decade, and someone who's it almost makes a point of pride how much he's been all over the map, named Keith Preston. I don't even know. Is is his old primitive webpage Attack the System even still online, or what?
I don't
What's his
know,
deal
but
there?
yeah, I'm not sure. But he did have a kind of a cultural edge to his anarchism that was very, very venomous
Yeah,
to
it's
leftist
been
cultural
more than
trends.
15 years since I had any. Well, that's entirely so. The last time we spoke on the phone, I think, was early 2008. But there was a period several years later when I was in touch with him on Facebook, and I was surprised at how often he could he could has he could strike some normie center left notes. I don't really remember having much direct interaction with his Facebook or anything like that when Trump first came on the scene or anything, or like just recalling the post Bernie months or stage of the 2016 election when I would have found myself very much identifying with the platypus, feeling like having the worst fears about what consolidation of the uniparty against Trump was going to lead to, and feeling like platypus represented um, comradeship, and that might be a good segue into where we wanted to lead this discussion, because they really only just reached out to me or knew or in my book on the Socialist Party, which was released right on the eve of the Bernie campaign, and that I promoted was promoting right then, and I spoke at their convention 2016. I didn't really know anything about who these people were. I was stunned by a lot of it. Um, so maybe tell me about how you became aware of platypus and sublation. Um,
I'm not particularly aware of platypus. That's some kind of salon or something, uh,
um,
and they meet in New York.
Short version, yeah. I mean, sublation is basically the most promising um, yet to emerge of platypus trying, or people who have passed through platypus and accept their basic views, because like apparently like Bhaskar Sankara, I understand, and um, a few of his closest collaborators uh, briefly passed through platypus as students, like at the very beginning of the 2010s, before they really came onto the scene. But anyway, so yeah, when I was first in touch with platypus, like around through 2016, 2017, and I mean, they were definitely not ready to make the leap into and just, I mean, like when the whole DSA 2.0 coming out happened, and just greeted with horror. And but on the other hand, just feeling like, because I was in touch with the platypus people, and just feeling like, oh, I actually have a fighting spirit now that I know what intervention they want to make. And it was it was a complete mess that ended as badly as one would have guessed. They were trying to, I guess, basically unify some very disparate non-Leninist left of DSA strands behind their more paleo-Marxist, or I don't know to what extent you want to make it about Trump. I mean, I think Chris Cutrone had a more clearly uh, Trump-centric view of things than I would have at that time. And to the extent I can remember having any exchanges with him online, I think that was our main difference. But yeah, no, that ended in disaster. And you, in your notes to me before we started, you asked me about Zero Books and how it became Sublation. I'm definitely not qualified on that. I mean, it happened like right around 2020. There was a nasty business dispute that reflected political differences. They had started to move in a left critical of woke direction around 2018, and Sublation, I think, with some of the investors who were on the other side of this implosion, on the same side as implosion, or the downside, with Doug Lane, basically relaunched Sublation, and that has basically been the vehicle. I'm not sure.
Okay, so there was some dispute with the people at Zero Books, and some wanted
Yeah,
to go in an
you should
anti-woke
have.
direction.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is. I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, just that you should by all means invite Doug Lane on before long. And I also
Okay,
mentioned, um,
that's interesting about them wanting to go in this kind of anti-woke direction. That did, started to become a kind of bandwagon, and it's a cottage industry, as they say. Just use two figures of speech right there. Okay, yeah. So I wonder if the wild success of Kill All Normies, and despite maybe its author's intention, the way it was taken somehow triggered them into thinking we should do something that kind of owns the rad libs a bit more all the time. And I'm speculating, but anyway, yeah. Yeah, on Kevin Carson, I want to go back to him for a moment. I remember him getting into a dispute with a writer named Connor Fitzpatrick at Jacobin, and it got ugly. Kevin Carson, as far as I know, he works as a nurse in Arkansas.
is it
And
Kilpatrick? No, I sort of like the guy. He was very uh,
he
Irish
hated libertarian. He
legacy
really, really
branded
hated.
guy
He
with the
absolutely
name.
hated libertarians. He hated libertarians. And he thought that, Kevin Carson's, sort of ambiguous anti-capitalist capitalism was just too much to stomach, I guess. And, he started making personal attacks, calling him Bubba and this stuff. And,
Oh God.
it was a little bit of a flinch of a culture war from, New York centric Connor Kilpatrick with his technocratic highfalutin Marxism, and then Kevin Carson with his kind of yeoman peasantry mutualism. it's just it showed me how much these kind of reptile brain culture war things can be triggered in these ostensibly more culturally neutral political economic disputes.
Oh my God. No, no. I mean, I think no, my reaction is I feel like I can remember, I think, yeah, in uh, late 2017 being at a large family reunion, and he was actually the one person I knew who I ran into when Bernie had his rally at Prospect Park in 2016. Was this distant cousin who I realized later I guess is about 70 now, but he's consignary, or I learned this word just the other day, don't ask why, but just he's of my grandfather's generation, and his father was 50 years older than him. So I had the realization, based on a conversation I'd once had with him years earlier, that he had to be the only person at that Bernie rally in Prospect Park who was only one generation, who had a parent who heard Eugene Debs speak. So that was trippy. But anyway, I remember like in like around the end of the first year of Trump when I saw him and having a conversation with him and just feeling like, oh my God, the past and present comfortably, confusedly together, having conversations about social. Point is, I thought Jews were weird that way with such a long memory, but what you're describing about Kevin Carson and the Irish Jacobin guy, it's almost as if they're refighting James Connolly against Gompers.
Yeah, yeah,
Sorry, I took too long to get there.
yeah.
Uh,
But even
um,
it's interesting because I go and say that I was sort of dispirited by their ugly culture war turn, making it not only that, but making it personal, and getting away from this kind of dry discussion of economics, economic interests. Do incentives work? How do they work? What is your theory of human behavior? And they were pulled into this ugly cultural space. But even I, have to go and graft my own cultural assumptions onto what they're doing. So in this reading, Connor Kilpatrick becomes the stuffy New York Jewish communist, and then Kevin Carson becomes the Gadsden flag waving rural libertarian guy. And even that is a story I tell myself that it may not even be true, but that's just sort of how I fit it into my schema. It just shows how relentless this kind of framing can be. You used to be involved in libertarianism and antiwar.com, but you were doing it as a left libertarian. What was the first inkling of your interest in political philosophy, and did it come more from pure political philosophy, or did you have an interest in economics first? Because I notice a lot of libertarians have an interest in economics first, and they actually build on that into a political philosophical space.
so I was 16 and just started community college right around the time of 9/11. That was my second week of college. And I mean, I'd have to tell the whole story um, with the right podcaster, which I certainly want to eventually. But basically, if you recall, this was, well, I mean, it's almost a cliche at this point about how different the Bush era left was. But I mean, this was really like the age of, as I somewhat presentist dated for shorthand call it, at least the second piece, the age of the Green Party InfoWars borderlands. Um, and that's, which may give you some idea of how I came to know Keith Preston.
Yeah,
But
I remember when Alex Jones. I remember when Alex Jones had a vaguely left orientation. His website Prison Planet overlapped a lot with the things the left was concerned about. But anyway, go ahead. So,
right. So, um, so I guess I, I guess kind of the extension of that, if you want to talk about political philosophy, I was still a college kid who barely knew his rear end from a hole in the ground, and I mean, well, but I do, and it's been true for a long time that I've looked back on when I was in college, and that that I most identified with each of the disparate elements at the same time. In other words, I most believed in socialism, or as any kind of life concept. I'm not sure that's precisely the right way to say it, but at the same time, I took Austrian economics the most seriously. Or at the same time, I took just what would a world after the state look like. Um, and I, in a funny way, like, I mean, when I first moved to New York, I was only 21. I had my ill-fated year of grad school, and like that, like flowed almost seamlessly into that first Ron Paul campaign, um, and that was. Well, I mean, that campaign in 2007, 2008 was itself the bright final flame out of the Bush era anti-war movement. Um, but it really was in a personal way for me as well. I and I know how much we want to talk about my first book, which came after that, and how much that was, in a somewhat odd way, how I, well, not entirely, but to a significant extent, filtered becoming more normie. And
That was the book. I think you said you released in 2016 around the Bernie campaign.
no, it was released in 2011. This was before my
Oh,
book on the Socialist Party. That was released in the
okay,
spring of 2015.
okay.
I know we want to talk about my family background or some of the other factors that led into that were part of this unstable mixture. I mean, so okay, so I no, the short version of where I came from intellectually is like, I mean, I had my family background in different ways on both sides came out of historic non-communist left or adjacent part of the labor movement, um, and I and going through this antiwar.com heyday libertarian phase, I started to pick up on how many of the people that Justin Raimondo invoked as his usable past old right were actually socialists, or at least certainly fellow travelers of Norman Thomas's Socialist Party, which I mean, my mother's parents, who knew and worked with everyone worth knowing in the labor movement at the height of the Cold War and leading into that, going back to the CIO of Story and Song, they never belonged to the Socialist Party, but they had many friends who did. I mean, I have my Bundist great grandfather, the first Jack Ross. My dad. So yeah, that's the other crazy thing in the mix. That my dad belonged to the Harvard YPSL, Young People's Socialist League, in the late '60s, where he got to know many of the neocons. So imagine my shock at 16, less than 6 months after 9/11, to begin to realize, oh, not only is Raimondo right about all this stuff, but my dad knew a lot of these people. And but anyway, so, but yeah, like again, just basically, I knew what was that there was more to that.
You had labor in your family background, it sounds like. Is that
Yeah. Oh yeah.
okay? Yeah, that I think is a way of getting a smart, very thoughtful person interested in economic ideas, class relations, not even necessarily in a left-wing variety, but just thinking about the people, their representation. Get a smart person to fundamentally have a more socialist-friendly view on matters. coming from a labor family. I out in the West Coast, like a lot of people here, relative to the more rooted East Coast, we don't have labor. We don't have a family history of unions and such. Not so much. You have firefighters and stuff who have a long, proud union in San Francisco or something like that. But in general, the kind of that moment in history, the factory moment in history, if you will, sort of bypassed some of the people on the West Coast, some of the latecomers on the kind of white immigration front. So I bet if I had come from a labor background, I don't know if I would have engaged in going down the kind of plumb line libertarian radical free market route so much. As it stands, I have law enforcement in my family, and I kind of think of that as somehow somewhere in between being like a silver-spooned son of a business scion and being the son of a factory worker or something. That's
Well, I mean, there are certainly a lot of people would describe my family background, my mother's side certainly, as aristocracy of labor. My grandfather was pretty substantially involved in getting the communists out of the CIO, and I mean, and a lot of the people that were their friends were the so-called State Department socialists, not the neocons, but people who worked on the Marshall Plan. But I guess to answer your question, I just was always intellectually precocious, and I guess you're not as interested in just the historical approach, but I mean, no, I would say I remember when I first began the research after getting a contract, first refusal of my first book to work on a Socialist Party book, and I looked at Tamerman at NYU, Daniel Bell, I had yet to read Daniel Bell's Marxian Socialism in the United States and realize how much that was the golden dawn of Cold War liberalism, most brutal and damning such like perspective. But I was looking at all his original source material, and just looking at the original source material that he collected for that before reading the essay itself, I'm like, oh my God, all of this right populist conspiracy adjacent, because I happen to also be in some of the most historically, I don't know, word peculiar. But no, I just saw it. Okay, I was right about all this. That this is how out there, right what would through later filters be seen as right populists, not
So
only the party of Debs, but into the 30s. And
you're saying that a lot of the kind of right populist, conspiratorial, or purely conspiracist, it began to actually make sense. They were actually generally correct, is what you're saying. But you're discovering
so it's a matter of
from a
being
place friendly to
correct,
the left.
but what I sensed about this stuff now, the stuff I was closest to, which again, I need to be better prepared than someone who really knew that era, talk about what it was, because there's as much that separates that from the very online right since 2016 as there is that separates the left of those two eras. I mean, and this was something very peculiar and antique. The that I found myself connected to, but no, that I was saying this is populism. This is what a real American left is or was, or I mean, it would be, it would be, I mean, to reconstruct the exact stages of learning about different things. I mean, I could also mention when my mother's mother died in 2004, and that was a month before I turned 19, and it would have been probably a month after my birthday that I was over cleaning out their house, and there were a number of books from the 30s that were crazy to find, that my good liberal Jewish grandparents in Bethesda, Maryland would have had. And I mean, and I only had a limited understanding of how all those pieces came together. I could, but it would probably be a bit into weird territory to talk about certain clues I learned about my family history, particularly my grandfather and his brother. That connection, though, I make some reference to that in the Socialist Party book, actually. Anyway,
Would you say that your politics is informed by sort of personal family history, or sort of regional specific histories, or a kind of detached, more social science point of view? So I think of the difference, in the economic debates in Germany in the late 19th century. You had these kind of historicist schools who believed that certain economic so-called laws were really sort of specific to their culture and their region, versus the emerging, both left and right, the kind of marginalists on the right and the Marxists on the left, who believe that economic rules and prognostications were universal, something like a social science, even if science would begin with a lowercase s. Where would you say you're at in that sort of?
I would, if that's if it's the binary you're presenting, it would be
Right.
more personal background or connection that I bring to it than any kind of, certainly than any kind of social science. Though in my most recent book, I have a card here I can hold up, which is the same as the cover image of the book. You can see clearer on this side, Strange Death of American Exceptionalism. I mean, that book takes a much more very old-fashioned political science style approach to our recent history, or to historical argument about it. My biblical 7 years learning the hard way, punditry is not my calling. And I had my blessed escape from the election back in the archives, in an enchanting old ruin on the banks of the Ohio I could tell you about. But wait, I'm sorry. What was the question immediately about social
It was
science versus
this kind of this binary, and I did create a binary over kind of approaching political economy from a sort of personal or historical perspective versus a a scientific perspective, as much as social science can really be science. I think there's limitations there, but and that's what I had asked. But and you said that it was more the first.